All right, great. So the recording has started, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. First, we just wanted to start with a quick roll call, get an idea who all is on the line. And then we've got a couple updates and announcements. So who all has joined us today?
Lori Long from Graceland, Southern Iowa RSVP.
We know Sheila's on the phone.
Yes, I'm here. And I actually got the thing to come up.
Awesome, that's great to hear. Anybody else besides Lori and Sheila? I know Jancy's on with us, and I think Vicky's joined as well. Anybody else on the line or on Skype?
Sonia Carlson, Hawkeye Community College Senior Companion Program.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, Sonia. All right. Well, we might be a small group today, but that is great. All the more fun for the three of you guys. So thanks for joining. First update we wanted to share is wanted to thank everybody for a successful Senior Corps Week. It sounds like a lot of programs were active in recognizing volunteers. We appreciated for those of you who sent us stories and updates. So thank you for all your hard work in supporting your volunteers and taking some time during our National Recognition Week to recognize the work that they contribute. So appreciate that. An update on your renewals and continuations. We know folks put a lot of time and effort into those applications, so thank you very much for working on those and getting them into us. We've been wrapping up our review, and those are moving up to the next step at the grants office, so we'll keep folks updated if the grants office has any questions, but should be hearing in the next few weeks of getting those fully awarded. So thank you everybody for hanging tight on that. As you may have seen earlier this week, announcement went out that the Senior Corps handbooks have been updated. They're doing quarterly updates to those now at headquarters. So the last round of updates was just this past few weeks ago on April 30th. You can get the most up-to-date versions on our website on the Managing Senior Corps Grants webpage. And if you're curious what changes were made, instead of having to go through the whole handbook to skim through that, there's a change log at the beginning that highlights those updates. So if you have any questions or trouble accessing that, please feel free to reach out to your program officer, and we'd be happy to walk through that with you. Also, that announcement that went out earlier this week was highlighting that Senior Corps is starting back up the Tuesday talks, and there's a couple coming up in June. One that's going to be focusing on educating elected officials and engaging them in your program, and another talk, that one's going to be on June 5th, another talk on June 12th. A national conversation being hosted is going to be focused on getting to know the Social Security Administration and looking at some tools and resources for your volunteers. So we'd encourage folks to check those out. Plan to attend if you're interested, but you've got a conflict that day. I'd still encourage registering for it so you get the reminders, and I believe usually they send out to those who attended or that were on the registration list a follow-up when the recording gets posted, so that way you can get a heads up when it's available on the website so you can go take a look at it. So that's a couple announcements from the state office. Does anybody else have any announcements you want to add, or announcements from your program or community that you want to share with your colleagues? All right, awesome. Well, then we'll just go ahead and jump into our Senior Corps Chat topic of the day. So we wanted to take some time to talk about impact narratives and talk about telling your story, communicating the impact of your program, your RSVP project, your SCP project, or your foster grandparent project. When we think about talking about impact narratives and in your story, what this really can do is provides an opportunity for all of us to communicate the work that you're doing in the community with your partners. These impact narratives can really raise awareness and demonstrate the value and the impact of national service in your program. And in some ways, they're great tools for us, but they can also be great tools for you as sponsors as you're engaging with your local media, with your local constituents. They can become, bits and stories that can strengthen your marketing and outreach materials as well. And it can also be a tool that, as you're thinking about capturing impact narratives and stories throughout the year and sending those to us during that time, when you've got it pulled together, you can also save them, and it can provide great material for your progress reports. So that's what we're going to focus on a little bit on our call today, is looking at how to put strong impact narratives together. What are some of the things that we're looking for, and we're going to take a look at a few examples. So as we dive into that, I'm going to pull up a little poll here, and this is my first time doing this, so let me know if it doesn't work. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so your screen should be changing. Do you see the poll? Looks like we do. So we want to, take a step back before we dive into it, and would love to hear your input on how you think the state office utilizes impact narratives. So when you tell us a great story, what do we do with it? And go ahead and choose your best guess there in the poll. And I guess since we've got a couple people following on with just the PowerPoint, you guys can't see the poll, so that's okay. We got a couple people responding here. I see an answer coming in for including it in our state office reports to promote impact to headquarters, and also using it to communicate with local, national, and state stakeholders on the impact of our programs. So thank you guys for joining in the poll. We're going to return back to the PowerPoint here. And for those of you following along, we are going to go one slide past the poll slide. Well, everybody was right. No mystery there. We use it for all three of those things. When you guys have great impact narratives to share with us, we include those in our reports that we send up to the North Central Cluster that then go up onto headquarters and to Senior Corps. We do that on a monthly basis, so we're always looking for great content that'll help us highlight and promote the work and impact you're having in the community. They may seem like things that you see often with your partners, or you might think, oh, well, this is just kind of what we do every day, but we want to hear it because it really gives us a chance to champion your work. So there's no impact or story too small to share with us. We also do use that content for supporting some of our social media outreach. It really helps us have more dynamic and stronger information and material to share on our Facebook page. Having a photo with a great story about, let's say, a foster grandparent volunteer who has been working with a child that's seen great improvement over the school year, or about an RSVP volunteer or group of volunteers that provides critical services, driving veterans to medical appointments, and being able to highlight that work. That really gets engagement and really helps us increase the visibility of national service. Sometimes the content doesn't just go through helping grow a social media presence and raise awareness about our programs at our state level. Some of our opportunities and information gets funneled up to the national handles as well. So our team at headquarters is always looking for great content to share from across the nation, great opportunities to maybe spotlight on the national blog and things like that. So when we get those from you guys, that really helps us do that. And having this material, having a collection of stories, an ongoing update about different types of impact programs are having, different ways volunteers are serving, and what that really means at a deeper level helps us better communicate and champion your work as we're meeting with and talking with local, state, and national stakeholders about our programs. So we use these impact narratives in many ways, and these 3 ways are probably the top 3 ways we're able to do that. So moving on to the next slide. So you might ask, what are some guidelines for putting impact narratives together? When do you guys want to hear them? What kind of things should we be looking for? And how should we kind of put these together? And so some basic guidelines for some topics. What we're really looking for is looking for narratives that demonstrate the impact your program's having, when possible aligning that with our strategic focus areas. So as you recall, that's disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, and veterans and military families. So when you've got a great, maybe VITA story that aligns with economic opportunity, about volunteer tax preparation in your community, or maybe a great mentor tutoring story, or a great independent living story for senior companions, those are going to align with things like economic opportunity, education, healthy futures. When we can connect these stories back to those key focus areas, that's always a plus. Also thinking about your primary focus area and where some of your outcome-based programming is, we want to encourage collecting impact and being able to communicate impact narratives from those areas as well. We know some of you have great events that go on in your community, maybe organizing local service day for MLK Day, or involving local representatives or congressional elected officials in events like what we used to call Mayor's Day, now National Service Recognition Day, or other times, even at your recognition throughout the year, maybe the mayor comes for your recognition as well and is a part of that event. We'd love to hear about that. So impact narratives can also share with us a story about a upcoming or past event, and that maybe engage some VIPs in your community. Would also be great to highlight new community partnerships or community program collaborations. So maybe through a lot of planning and collaborating, you're launching a new station, maybe you have a new partner that's going to be doing some pretty innovative programming, and you're going to engage your RSVP, FGP, or SCP volunteers in that work. And so that's a great idea to put an impact narrative together about maybe some of the potential impact that's going to be coming down the road, and share that with us. Then also, when your program gets visibility, maybe gets a media mention, a news mention, let us know and send us a story about that. A couple other topics or examples of things that we usually look to encourage to have on the radar is if your sponsor is receiving new grants or additional funding to support your programming, or maybe had a successful fundraising event that's going to expand the capacity of one of your projects, or you've secured some new local sponsorships, let us know about that. And we've got on here recognition, special honors, awards, recognizing volunteers for milestones of service, or if volunteers are getting collected for governor's awards or other local honoring opportunities. Those make for great impact narratives as well. And then we mentioned a little bit about service days and special initiatives, and anytime we can connect the work of your program and your volunteers with those, we look to. So now that we've talked a little bit about about topics, let's take a look at structure. So, how do we put some of these together? What are some of the key points that we encourage when writing impact narratives and keeping them clear, concise, but providing enough information that they kind of capture some of the important details. So some basics on structure are generally we encourage for an impact narrative to be about a paragraph in length. It's great to be written in the third person and written for an outside audience. So when doing that, we want to use quantifiable information when possible. We want to spell out acronyms, avoid general nouns, and be specific about some of the programs and activities that we're seeing there. And we want to include pictures when possible. So if you've got a great photo that goes along with the story, and in those pictures, it's great to, if possible, have volunteers with some branding, whether it's the logos, signage, or some Senior Corps gear. And we want to be able to answer those questions of who, what, when, where, and why in these impact narratives. So we'll break that down a little bit further here in a minute. But when thinking about this, we really want to stress that written for an outside audience, for somebody who's maybe not 100% familiar with our work, it's great to be able to put this together in a soundbite, because having that then becomes a great tool for you when you're educating folks in the community or meeting with folks that aren't as familiar with our work. We want to think about what are those assumptions that we might be used to because we work with every day, but we might want to make sure it's clear or spelled out in this impact narrative when we're crafting these great stories. So that's one of the reasons we stress that in here. So let's look at the structure. This is an example. We're on the structure who slide for those of you following along. When you're thinking about the who part of the structure, we want to make sure we're including in the impact narrative things like the program and project name, including who's the sponsor, so that's you guys, and mentioning who's being served, that's the beneficiaries, and are there any other community partners or stakeholders involved in the work as well. So I'll read out this example here. We've got an example of a story from Minnesota. So in this example, in July, 257 Crow Wing RSVP volunteers responded to a Category 2 hurricane strength superstorm that hit northern Minnesota. As a result of the winds that hit 100 miles per hour in areas, personal property damage estimates alone were estimated to be in the upwards of 50 million. Crow Wing RSVP volunteers provided an array of critical recovery services to families in the aftermath of the storm. Volunteers helped 147 families by providing services including brush, limb, and tree cleanup removal. RSVP volunteers also provided safety checks, water, food, transportation, and equipment such as generators and chainsaws to families impacted by a storm. The Crow Wing RSVP volunteers served as a local resource to an AmeriCorps NCCC team deployed with NCHAMA, a disaster response nonprofit, to remove 28 downed trees throughout the community. RSVP's immediate response to the disaster provided critical support and instilled a sense of hope following this devastating storm. So we bolded in red here, kind of highlighting the who section of this impact narrative. So the Crow Wing RSVP volunteers is the who we're talking about. Crow Wing's the sponsor, and RSVP volunteers are the folks serving. They're serving 147 families that were impacted by this disaster. And the community partner or other stakeholders here are NCHAMA and the AmeriCorps NCCC team that was joined on this project. So next, let's look at the what. So the what is really taking a look at, providing a description of what volunteers are doing and what's happening here in the narrative. It can be brief, but you want to provide enough detail about specific roles or activities so there's context to that outside party of what kind of impact and what kind of purpose and value your Senior Corps volunteers are bringing to this. So here the what is really that the volunteers are responding to that hurricane storm. This is what happened. The storm created this kind of damage in the community, and the activities volunteers are providing, those critical recovery services, the brush removal, the tree cleanup, and the safety checks and the equipment distribution. So the next is talking about the when. It's important when we get these stories that we can provide context to time. Was this something that happened over a year? Was this something that happened recently? Was this a couple weeks of service? Or, what's that context? So when we're looking at the impact, we have an understanding of that. So here, they do that pretty early on. They say in July at the beginning of the story. So we know if we got this story in August or we got this story in September, we know earlier in the year in July is when RSVP volunteers were engaged in this recovery activity. And then next section, we're looking at the structure of the question of where, and they do that pretty early on here as well, right in the beginning of the impact narrative. We know that this storm hit in northern Minnesota, and so that these volunteers are serving across northern Minnesota. It's common to include the region, or maybe it makes more sense to name the city or the county or just the state, depending on the scope of the work and what your volunteers are doing. And finally, this next section is probably one of the most important parts of the impact narrative, is really answering the question why. So it's important for us to know, the who and the what and what are we doing and who are we serving and things like that, and the specific activities. But it's really, I think, the secret sauce to these impact narratives is circling it back to being able to communicate the why, understanding kind of the as a result, the impact that your volunteers are having that are making a difference across in addressing that community need. So answering the questions, what's the benefit and how does it address the critical need in our community? And so highlighted in red here, we've got identified the need as the damage and the challenge that those families are going to be facing to recover from that. And the benefit is how RSVP's response to this is instilling a hope in the community and is connecting those families to those resources to recover from that disaster. So looking at this example, I hope this helps kind of break down some of the different structural aspects of putting an impact narrative together. Now that you all are experts, we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to play a game, and we're going to take a look at a couple different examples and ask the question, what's missing? Ask the question, how could we improve this story? So we're going to start with the same sample we were just looking at, the Crow Wing RSVP volunteer story as they're recovering from that Category 2 storm. And I'd invite you all to take a quick read through this again. Here we're on, for those of you that are following along on the slides, we're on slide 14. And I'd encourage in the chat or go ahead and unmute your phone. After you've taken a look at it, jump in and share what you feel is missing from this story. So we're looking at the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. And what do you feel is missing from the why? And if you're looking at the PowerPoint, I'd encourage just ignore the notes because the answer key is in the notes.
No cheating, Sheila.
Well, it is the what that's missing. Because the earlier paragraph talked about how they assisted 147 families and what they did.
You are spot on. So great job. You were right. And you can kind of see after seeing the story with the what, now that you look at it without that, you can kind of see like, well, that's great that they responded to this and that they worked with this NCCC team and they helped provide hope and immediate recovery to the storm, but it really doesn't tell you what did they do and how did they have that impact. So you can see how different it is without the what in there. So great job. So we're going to make it a little bit harder. We're going to look at an example of a story that we didn't just go through all the structure pieces on. Take a look at this next one on slide 15, or if you're following along on the webinar here, I've got it pulled up. And this is a story about the Tuesday Toolmen, RSVP volunteers who do fix-it projects and help seniors remain independent in their homes. Take a look at that story, and what do you think is missing there? How would you go about improving this story if you were to send it in to us? This story does a great job of communicating what the Toolmen do and talks about some of the quantifiable impacts that they've had. At the end there, they do a great job of kind of saying, hey, as a result, we've served this many hours with this many volunteers and have helped 70 seniors make 147 repairs, and these activities are making a difference to help them keep them independent in their homes. But what's a question you might ask when you're like, wow, this is all great work. This sounds like a great sponsor, a great RSVP program. They're having an impact. But what's missing for you?
I think the when is missing.
The what?
The when.
The when. Yeah. So the when isn't overly clear. They do say in the last year there at the end. So it kind of gives you a little bit of context to that this has probably been, going on for a while. So over the last 12 months or so, this has been happening, but it could be a bit more specific with some when. What else do you feel like you are scratching your head saying, man, I'm not able to place this? What state is this story from? So the location is missing here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know, is this an Iowa story? Is this a Florida story? Where is this impact happening? So I think that's a great example of when, you're writing the story and you kind of live and breathe this work and you're thinking, well, obviously it's from my community, right? But an outside reader, an outside audience, might be a few steps removed from your program, and it's important to include that. So you might say, the Tuesday Toolmen do this activity in this community, this county, this city, where they're serving all these seniors and making these great repairs. So let's move on to the next example. So far I've stumped you guys once, so it's 1-1. So I hope you guys, get the next couple of these here. So this next story is about a feeding program, a Healthy Future story here. So I'd invite you to take a moment and read about the Yankton, South Dakota School District and take a look at what you think is missing and let us know how you would improve it. All right. Does anybody have an idea of what they might add in there to make this a stronger story? This is a tricky one because they've kind of got it in there, but it's something that I could probably be a bit more specific. They're pretty specific about the who, and the where is pretty clear. The what is pretty specific in what they're doing.
The when is it? I mean, the when you got the where, the Yankton School District.
Yeah? Yeah, you're spot on the when. So they talk about 3 weeks, but the first 3 weeks of the project so far have had these impacts. So it sounds like it's off to a great start, but we don't really know when this was happening. And when these stories, let's say, go in our reports, or when you add this into, let's say, a marketing flyer that you're putting out to kind of talk about the impact of your program, or a one-pager that you're putting together to share with your local community leaders about the work your volunteers do, and as they're thinking about recognizing the value of your volunteers, being a bit more specific about the when. So maybe, mentioning the program launched in February of 2018, and in the first 3 weeks, the program served an average of 77 families and so forth. So that makes that story a little bit more timeless to where anybody could read this a few months later, and it would still kind of provide that context. So great job. Awesome. So 2-1, you guys are ahead now. So we've got another final story here. So is it going to be a tie, or are you guys going to take the cake on this? So last story is about RSVP of Red River Valley. And it's about their volunteers leading their Bone Builder class. So go ahead and take a look at that and let me know. Feel free to jump in the chat, or feel free to jump in on the phone if you think you've got something that would help improve that story, if you think something's missing. All right. I see Sheila wrote in the chat, there's nothing about the dates. Was that for this one? I just had that screen minimized, so I apologized. Or was that a previous one, Sheila? Oh, prior one. Okay. Great. Thanks. Sorry about that. Thanks for joining in the chat. I have confidence you guys can get this one. So let's look at what we've got. We've got the sponsor, and we've got the who answered with the volunteers and the senior participants. We've got the purpose and kind of the why in here, right? So, purpose is to combat and prevent or reverse osteoporosis impact, and so Healthy Futures alignment, and the program seeing 95% of participants showing improvement in balance and strength, and so some great quantifiables in this story, and we know a little bit about the program, but would you say you've got a good idea of what those 124 volunteers are doing to support the program?
No,
No? Yeah, so
no.
they could probably we know that they're supporting the program, but that's pretty broad, right? So they might be in different roles like greeters, they might be teaching the classes, they might be doing outreach or recruiting folks to participate in the classes. There's many different roles that those volunteers might be playing. So I think that's a great example of where that could be a little bit clearer. And I see here in the chat, again, no dates of when the activity took place, and that is spot on as well. So, this is a great story, but it could be improved by being a bit more specific. All this great impact that folks have had, is that a year's worth of impact? Is that a month's worth of impact? Is that 2, 3, 4 years worth of impact? So these numbers have more meaning when we give them the context of time, and have more meaning when we give them the context of what. So thank you. Thanks for playing this game. You guys got 3. I stumped y'all on 1, so y'all are the winners. Congratulations. I unfortunately don't have any giveaways, but maybe next time. So I appreciate you walking through that activity. I hope that helps, just kind of looking at some examples and thinking about the who, what, when, where, and why when putting these stories together to talk about the impact of our programs, and kind of how to do that. I would encourage, as you're thinking about capturing impact stories with your program, if you're ever kind of struggling on, how to craft it, or, it doesn't have to be perfect when it comes to us, please send it to us either way, or feel free to give your program officer a call, and we'd be happy to walk through, hey, I think if we can add a little bit more in here, this would really help kind of round out the picture. So we're happy to work on that with you. We know you all are doing great work, and so we want to highlight that. We want to be able to recognize the impacts you're having and the work that your volunteers are doing. So we have in our next steps here in Ask, we know you're already collecting a lot of this information in other ways, and you're sharing stories with us during your PPRs. But we do a monthly report to promote the work that's happening here in Iowa with headquarters, and it's always better to have stories be more timely. When we get a 6-month report and that impact was from 6 months ago, it doesn't carry as much excitement. So we're going to encourage and ask that folks maybe try to send us a story per quarter. So for each project, that's about 4 stories per year. Hopefully you've got more, and feel free to send us more than that. You can send your impact narrative and any pictures that you think might be a great complement to support that story to ia@cns.gov. And we'll be sure to include it in our reports and promote it on our Facebook page and add it to our materials about what's going on here in Iowa. The beauty of it is you can reuse these stories in your PPR. So hopefully by collecting some of these and sharing them with us, you can keep them in a Word document, and when it comes time, you can copy paste them right into your PPRs and that other accomplishments or in those stories sections. So you'll have a leg up, and those PPRs will be just a little bit easier to complete when that time comes around. So I'll be sending out a copy of a cheat sheet, an impact narrative guide, so that you guys have that as a reference tool. And I'm going to pull up here on my screen real quick a copy of what we'll also send out. So for those of you that are watching along, we've got this new impact narrative form. And so as you can see on here, and I'll send this out after our presentation today, as you can see, it's got a space for you to list some basic information about your project, and then you can type out your story. And on the second page, if your story also includes maybe there was an event that was going on, or you engaged some elected officials in the story or the event, like the mayor or local state representative, then you can include that information at the bottom on the second page. And it's going to be a PDF, but it's a fillable PDF, so you can just type right in it and save it and then send that to us. If you have any trouble with the form, feel free to reach out, let us know. We'd be happy to walk through that with you. So before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions? Any thoughts, any advice for colleagues when thinking about impact narratives?
Well, Dave, I have a question. This is Lori.
Sure.
Could I mean, you sent the slides because I was participating on the phone. Could I use those slides to share with my site coordinators?
Yeah, please do. Please feel free to use those examples. I'm a visual learner. I like to kind of look at samples when I'm learning, and I think that can be really helpful sometimes to share those kind of things with folks when you're doing trainings or encouraging, because I know you probably get a lot of your stories from your station supervisors since they're kind of on the ground with your volunteers. So yeah, feel free to repurpose those and you take what you want from the presentation and use with that with folks. So that's a great idea. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, great. Well, thank you all for taking some time this Thursday afternoon for our Senior Corps chat. I appreciate that you guys had some great ideas there, and thanks for walking through the material with us. We'll send a follow-up with a copy of the recording and the impact narrative cheat sheet along with the new PDF form, so you've got that, and we look forward to hearing your stories and continuing to amplify and champion the work that you all do across the state. So thank you very much for that. We hope you have a great rest of your Thursday and a great weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.